Hey guys, I just wanted to run through some things about analysis and what we have. So in our group folder, you'll see a few different folders called test images. I'm in test images 4 just because I was making a lot of images lately. So the first thing to look at is, so we're looking at the 4 states and the 3 congresses. So for each state and each congress, there's one image. So that's 12 images like that. And then there's also a scatter plot for each one, which I'll get to in a second. So looking at these, sort of how we can analyze this at first is, I know they're kind of cluttered. I couldn't get it to fix it. But anyways. So what we're looking at is the size of each node. So the connections between the nodes are how many times any one person has voted with a person from the opposite party. So we're only looking at times where a Republican voted with a Democrat, and any red node will only have connections to blue nodes, and blue nodes will only have connections to red nodes. So the thicker and darker the line, the more connections that node has with any given node that it's connected to. And the size of each node is that node's total strength. So like how many connections they have to everyone, not just any particular node, like an edge. So just off the bat, what we can see is in any state that has a majority, so like this, we're looking at California, the 113th Congress. California has a majority of Democrats. So the minority is always, pretty much always in the center, and they'll have the larger nodes. Because whoever the majority party is, and in this case it's Democrats, they're going to vote for, mostly everything that Democrats will vote for. But the Republicans, if they want to vote for something, they're sort of forced to vote with the Republicans. And we can see, and that's why they're bigger. But we can see here in particular that most of the Republican nodes in California are a lighter shade of red. They're more, there's one like very white, or I think that's a blue node actually, but this one is quite white. And for the most part, most of them are quite moderate. There's only, looks like 1, 2, 3 nodes that are very conservative. And we can see that through all these really dark lines, they mostly connect to the lighter colored blues, which are the more moderate Democrats. And the darker colored blues, I hope you can see my mouse, the darker colored blues are on the left side, and they have significantly fewer connections. And we can see that the darkest blue, I guess it might be this one here, but also this one is quite dark, Mike Honda. He has very few connections. So that's pretty important. Now, I also took the averages, or the mean of the mean political leaning of all Democrats and the mean political leaning of all Republicans in the state. And it shows that they're both averaging at, from totally moderate at 0, and for Democrats it's between 0 and -1, and Republicans it's between 0 and 1. They're both right in the middle. I'm not so sure how significant that is, but I wanted to include it. We can think about, when you guys watch this, I hope you also come up with ideas that I haven't thought of, and like how to analyze. So, so for pretty much each one, there's also a scatter plot where on the bottom we see what I was just describing, and these show individual nodes. So Democrats are here on the left, Republicans are on the right, and in California, we can see that there's 36 Democrats up here at the top and 14 Republicans. So Democrats have quite a large majority. This average strength ratio was something I included at first. I'm not so sure how important it is anymore. I'll talk about that in a second. But we can see here that there's a trend where the most conservative Democrats, or I shouldn't say that, the most extreme or liberal Democrats, closest to -1, they have pretty much the fewest connections to the Republicans. And those closer to 0 have more connections, which means that the Republicans were more willing to vote with these people on bills, or these people were more willing to vote on Republican bills. And we can sort of see the same thing with the Republicans as well. We see those closest to the center are quite high, and in general they're quite high, but as you get closer to 1, this node here, and there's a small decline, but I guess particularly this node. So at least those closer to 0 are still very high, and we see some, the further you get right, go down. So that it shows that they're less willing to vote on either Democratic bills, or Democrats are not willing to vote on bills that these people vote on. Oops. So we see that pretty much for everyone. So this is California 113th Congress, and here we see it on the 114th. And I wish the layouts sort of would reproduce a similar pattern, but they don't. It's random every time. And we can see that, in general in California, again, not much has changed. There's one really white node, and in general, their colors are quite light. They're not super dark. We have quite a few really dark blues, actually, and they're typically the smaller nodes. Like even Nancy Pelosi here, she's a very dark blue. So is Mike Honda again. And these tend to be the smallest nodes. And Nancy Pelosi, she has like hardly any connections at all. And yeah, the nodes that Republicans seem to prefer are definitely the lighter blues. So yeah, there's not too much else to see. This, they're sort of out of order just because the way I had to name them. But here we see pretty much the same thing. Most notably among Republicans, or among Democrats, the closer you get to 0. The higher strength they have, so it means more people voted with them. I should probably adjust the x-axis to go from -1 to 1. Right now it just scales with whatever data is there. So we can see like Republicans, someone is very, very conservative, and we have no one on the Democrat side who's very, very liberal, it seems. Or at least who doesn't approach 1 exactly. And then 115th Congress, we see the same thing. I'm not going to spend any more time on California. In Florida, so in the 113th, we see that there's 15 Republicans and 10 Democrats. So Republicans do have a majority, but not by much. And we see, again, the minority party is in the center, and they typically have bigger nodes. So, and the biggest two nodes here are these two very light blue nodes, and you can see that they vote with Republicans the most, or Republicans choose to vote with them the most on bills. So we're seeing a similar pattern. And the darkest blue is this one, and they are the smallest blue dot. And the darkest reds, I guess these two, and maybe this one, they are also quite small. But it does seem like there's still quite a lot of connections. And just to note, I got rid of everyone below the 25th percentile just to get rid of people voting on bills that everyone would vote on. So we want to see who are the people that actually are willing to vote on bills that the other party supports. So in Florida, we see that in general, most of them are moderate, both the Democrats and Republicans, and we can see that, like there aren't a huge cluster of big nodes like we saw in California, and we see a lot more, I feel like, like more average size edges and connections. So here we see this again. Doesn't show too much, but in the Democratic Party, we see the closer you are to -1, you have lower node strength. Here's those two nodes that were very large. So closer to 0, typically a bit higher node strength. It's less among Republicans. Yeah, Florida again. Just more ways of looking at it. I think Florida is kind of unique because it does have a majority Republican, but not by a huge margin. Only a couple people, so yeah. Okay. Looking at New York, this is a majority Democrat, similar to California. We see for the 113th Congress, 20 Democrats, 6 Republicans, and by far the largest node is this one, who is a moderate Republican. So the Republican nodes, the minority party, should be the sort of center point and the biggest nodes. And we see that. We see that this person's strongest connections appear to be to these 3, which are all very light blue. And his weakest connections look to be, I guess, I don't know. Can't necessarily say. Although it is kind of surprising that there's this very dark red. It's quite a large size, but yeah. This is a bit surprising, I guess. I think this node is really throwing it off. But you see, like, as you get closer to 0 for Republicans who are in the minority, they don't actually have a higher node strength. But there's only 6 observations of Republicans, so it's hard to tell. Again, New York, the large nodes should be Republicans because they're a minority. Here they're 50%, 9 Republicans, 18 Democrats. Or they have 50% of the numbers that Democrats do. So yeah, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. And getting to Texas. So in Texas, we see a Republican-leaning state. They have twice as many Democrats, or twice as many Republicans as Democrats. And so Democrats are the minority party. We see that they're the largest nodes. The darkest blues tend to be smaller dots. The lighter blues are the bigger ones. And we see that among the Republicans as well. The darkest dot, I think, is this one. And these are the smallest nodes. So, yeah, I don't know if there's much. It's hard to look at these because I have these scatter plots in between to look at sort of a shift in time. We need to get rid of the scatter plots and sort of put them together side by side to look at if there's any difference over time. Yeah. What I do see, I guess, here, I guess what we can look at is the mean scores to see over time, are Republicans getting more conservative? So is this number getting closer to 1? And Democrats, are they getting more liberal in a state that's very conservative already? And we see that, yes, both of them went closer towards their extremes. Between the 114th and 115th, Republicans stayed the same at 0.68, which is still quite high. And Democrats went 1 more, 0.01 more. So yeah, that's sort of what we have to work with right now. I was working on producing some other plots about so I was trying to look at the sort of the percentage of Republicans in a state. So, if it's below 50%, it's a Democrat majority. If it's above 50%, it's a Republican majority. And then on the y-axis, I was trying to look at, that label is wrong. But I was thinking about different ways to represent data, like the more percentage of Republicans you have, or the more percentage of Democrats you have, does that have any impact on how, like, how liberal or how moderate the opposite party is? So if one state has a huge majority of Democrats, does that mean that the Republicans in that state are going to be quite moderate, or are they going to be like in deeply entrenched Democratic, districts, and they can be very extreme? So I was trying to look at that. I wasn't quite sure how to represent the data, but that's what we have. So go ahead and look at these. If you also want to look at this in test images, well, there's a bunch of folders I have. If we look at test images 2, I have pretty much the same data, but so the way you can read these are, it has the state, the Congress, no threshold versus threshold. So no threshold shows all of the observations, and then the threshold I get rid of. So this is actually showing the same data, but I get rid of observations below the 25th percentile, just to get rid of all of these connections. Again, I said that at the beginning, that I wanted to get rid of times where people vote together, not necessarily because they're supporting the other party, but because it's a bill that everyone supports. Like, should we recognize, Thanksgiving as a national holiday or something? Everyone's going to support it. So that's the difference between the threshold and no threshold. And then FR and comp are two different layouts. So comp stands for components, and it's a layout to emphasize. That's the one that basically I think the comp layout looks the best, which is I only use the comp in what I've shown you so far. The FR stands for, I don't know, a different layout, I forget the name. But it emphasizes centrality, and it just looks a bit different. So these two are the same data. Is there a better one I can look at? Yeah, so these two are the same data. This shows comp, and this shows the FR layout. And in general, I just think comp does a better job of sort of organizing and showing differences and showing what's important. This also looks good, but in general, when we look at, this is components, and I think it does a really good job of representing it. But go ahead and look at the others. This is FR, and this also does a good job. So it's just different ways of representing the data, and we can choose whichever one everyone thinks looks best. This also looks very good, but with a lot of observations, it looks less good. Florida doesn't have that many representatives. So yeah, again, this is the same data with two different layouts. So please go in the folder, the shared folder, look at these, test images 2, test images 4, and think about, I guess, ways we can represent more data or things that you want to change, and yeah, that stuff.